Hey everyone, it's Alex, and you're listening to the Everyday Stories podcast, a podcast about the everyday stories from the people you know and the people you don't know, here to help you learn a thing or two about life and the stories that define us. Today we're talking to Gem. Gem works in program management, transforming disjointed systems into intuitive people first solutions. By night, she brings spicy, sapphic, and gay fan fiction to life, narrating Danmei stories into audio gems under the alias Danmei Podfics with Gem. So, Gem, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, of course. I think that we first need to get into a vocabulary lesson
Yes.
for those that are unfamiliar with a lot of the words that I probably just said. So, if you could give us a rundown of like what is fan fiction,
Right.
smut, Danmei, audio gems slash podfics, what
Yeah.
is all of this?
That's so funny putting me on the spot. But yes, well, I'm a big Asian pop culture fan, so I'm pretty sure you're familiar with anime a
Yes.
little bit. Okay, so like there's like subgenres. So within anime, I like BL, which is boys love content. So whether that's like manhwas or comics, and then a subversion of that is Danmei, which is Chinese boys love. So that stems specifically out of China. So from there, like there are, if you look up Seven Seas Entertainment. They are the largest producer in the United States, now producing and publishing a lot of Chinese novels into English spoken novels so people can, get more exposed to this subgenre, which people are more familiar with BL from Japan. In terms of fan fiction, it's really just derivative works of, I don't know. Do you have a favorite like show or artist or movie or book?
Ooh, I grew up watching Criminal Minds.
Okay, so I'm willing to bet you if you Googled fan fiction Criminal Minds, you're gonna find spin-offs of your favorite show in like different universes. So that's basically it. It's like fan created works based off like published material, if that makes sense. Like what happens when you're done watching your favorite show? You're gonna find content for it still exists in all these other like alternate universes. And then smut. It's just really a lot of like spicy stories you would expect in any type of like even fiction you buy off the book. I mean, off the store. So like with fan fiction, a lot of writers in my community like to write smut, and I like to read it. So there you go. It's like a lot of spicy content.
So I'm assuming smut is almost like a 50 Shades vibe, but for any universe of your favorite TV show or movie or piece of media.
Correct. And if you think of like it could be 50 Shades. It could be, there's a lot of different tropes. It could be a friends to lovers type of erotic content. It could be, like, I don't know how X-rated I can get on here, but like if you can imagine it exists,
Got
essentially.
it. And then tell me about Dan May and then Audio Gems and Podfix.
Yeah. So I've been, I grew up watching anime like since I was like 10. I watched like Sailor Moon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Dragon Ball Z. And as I got older, I started diving into like romance and erotica, and I discovered like boys love content. So a lot of like Japanese animes, a lot of like novels. And I came across Danmei. I think there was a show on at the time it was Funimation, now it's Crunchyroll. My sister's like, "You gotta watch this." I was like, "Watch what?" She's like, "There's this show. It's like censored, so China has a lot of censorship. So you think they're kind of like bros." She's like, "No, it's romance. You got to look at the cues of what they censored." So I watched it, and I was like, "Oh, this is really interesting." So I decided to pick up the book, and ever since I started reading the books, I kind of just went down this rabbit hole. Like, oh, like it's really cool to see kind of like male characters in non typical roles. When you think about like queer relationships, I feel like there isn't enough representation. So like yes, like erotica and queer relationships exist, but it's a part of a larger type of niche. So like in Danmei, there's a lot of wuxia. So like it's like a culture where they focus kind of like on magic and cultivation, where you have these people who want to become eternal. So you're practicing these like Chinese folklore to become like the strongest person like ever. So you can become immortal essentially. So it's all wrapped up in politics. It's wrapped up in magic. It's kind of like world building. On top of that, you have romance between male characters. So I think it's just like a different type of vibe that I have not gotten in typical literature based in the United States. So ever since then, I just kind of started going down a rabbit hole. And once I finished some of the most popular series in Chinese, like fan translated into English, I was like, what else exists? And I stumbled across fan fiction. Now, myself, I've never delved into fan fiction until 4 years ago, but I know people who grew up like writing fan fiction, like, oh, yeah, I was 10 when I wrote my first fan fiction. So I feel like a late bloomer, but because there's so many like older adults, like, or more mature adults in my genres that I read, you could have like literary works are like, oh my God, like, why isn't this published? And it's really just people who like to write or create because they love, a published work, or they're a fan of his existing work and they want to keep producing content for the community. So that's kind of how I fell down the rabbit hole.
Got it. And just to clarify,
Yeah.
is Danmei almost like a genre of fan fiction?
No, Danmei is a genre. If you go to Barnes and Nobles and you just walk and you go to let's say the anime section, you're gonna see a section just called Danmei. So it's like it's a genre, a literature. So it's boys love literature based out of China.
Oh,
And I
and
just create fiction. I create fan fiction from that literature of those published works.
okay.
Yeah.
And the boys love, is that just like gay men
Yeah,
stories? Gay guy
basically.
stories.
Yeah, and there's
Okay.
also girls love too. So there's Yuri and then like boys love, but it's mainly male characters together, love
Got
stories.
it. And then tell me about the audio gems and podfics and how
Yeah.
that is blended into what you do too.
Absolutely. So I'm sure, I don't know if you're a fan of like narrated actual audiobooks. So I don't know. I'm just going to throw out Harry Potter. Like there's probably a narration for Harry Potter. Well, like when people write fan fiction, they call like the narration of that podfic. So it's kind of like, oh, like a podcast of a fic that somebody wrote. So
Okay.
I reach out to writers. I'm like, hey, I really enjoyed reading your fan fiction. Can I record it? So the actual term for that is like a podfic. Like, hey, check out this audio version of this fan fiction I wrote. So I
Oh,
turn written stories that people wrote into audio, literal gems people can listen to as well.
yeah. And how did you get into the podfics?
What's funny is I thought I was going to debut as a VTuber, so that's why I kind of have like this whole mic set up. I mean, I have a song, I have one song, but I was just like, it's really hard to write songs. I was reading so much fan fiction, like I was losing sleep reading so much at night. I was like, what if I could just listen to this? So I had this crazy idea. I was like, let me just record a story. So I asked one of my friends who has like a really well-known story in the community. I was like, hey, can I turn this to an audio fic? Like, would you be weird? She's like, no. So I recorded it. I put it on Spotify, and then it was like 13,000 downloads later. Like, I guess people really like erotic stories. So I just kept going.
Wait, oh my gosh. Is it usually like really popular pieces of fan fiction? And also, where do you
Yeah.
find them?
It's interesting is I think what I did was kind of odd because there's like this unspoken rule, like people don't want fan works taken out of fan communities because then it's kind of getting exposed to people who probably won't appreciate it, like, oh, what the fuck is this?
Mm,
But if you Google archive of our own, you're probably going to find fan fiction for every possible media you can think of. From I mean, I don't even know, like Batman, just like Criminal Minds, you're probably going to see like stories of like alternate universes of those published work. So that's like the number one place for me because I read specific books, I search for specific content, and then I'm like, oh, I really like the story. So I connect with that author. And you kind of just go through this rabbit hole of people who like the same content as you. And it's like whether somebody's drawing art or whether somebody's writing fics for it, or I don't know, like somebody could cosplay like their favorite characters. So once I started reading all these stories, I was like, okay, I just selected stories I particularly like, but I realized kind of the genres I was reading are pretty popular. So like getting people to like, oh my God, there's an audio fic, getting people excited about listening was kind of something that blew up because there was no, at least when I started, there was no audio fics of like quote popular stories I was already reading or people were already reading.
so this is like a very new territory that we're getting into.
Yeah, I would say it's very niche. Like fan fiction is niche. So you kind of have like
Yes.
that community. And then in it, fan fiction is like popular, people read, but not many people. There are only certain people who like to listen to those stories, right? Like, oh, like some people get weird about listening to audio in general. Like,
Fair.
oh, it doesn't sound like this. Or so once I started doing it, people were like, oh, this is pretty cool. So then I started building kind of a community around like, hey, listen to your favorite fics that, I work with these authors and I'm able to turn into, something you can have accessible when you don't necessarily want to read.
My gosh. This is such an interesting world because actually,
Yeah.
to your point, growing up, I was truly obsessed with Criminal Minds, and I have read my handful of Criminal Minds fan fiction,
Yeah.
maybe smut versions, because I don't know, I was a teenager and I was like, what are these hormones?
Yeah.
I want to read more of this stuff. And I can't even remember what platform it was on. I just
Yeah.
somehow found it.
Right.
I guess, but it's crazy that it's just like a whole other world and like so neat. It can be so niche sometimes. And I wanted to get back to sort of your roots with getting into
Yeah.
the audio or the podfic and fan fiction world is when did you discover your first fan fiction or like what were you really drawn to in the immediate and how has that changed?
I think what's interesting is like for me, I discovered fan fiction 4 years ago. I think I finished a popular novel series, and it's Danmei. It's called Heaven Official's Blessing, where it's kind of a prince that he falls from grace, he loses like his powers, and he like the god of the underworld. That everybody's afraid of kind of becomes like his closest confidant, and he doesn't know why this god is kind of obsessed with him. So yeah, I don't want to spoil too much, but I think once I finish watching the series, so there is a dongwa, which is like an anime for it, and then I read the books, I was like, God damn it, like what else is there? My friend's like, hey, there's this fan fiction. It's really popular in the community. It's 1 million words. It's like bookmarked over like I don't know, 5,000 times. Like, I was like, oh, like who writes 1 million words of like a published work? And they're like, oh, it's kind of like an alternative of like everything we didn't know what happened in the novel. So once I read that,
Mm.
I was like, how does somebody do this for free? So like the whole thing about fan fiction and just the fan communities, people aren't doing this necessarily for clout. They're doing it for free, like for accessible works. Like, hey, it's because I like it. Who else is going to like my stuff? So I think once I read that, I was like, okay, there has to be more. I was like, what if I had my favorite characters, I don't know, as pop stars? There's a story for it. Like, what if they, I don't know, it was a college AU, they met in college instead of what happened on like in the actual show. There's something for it. So anything that wants this, you want to satisfy your needs or your interests, there's probably fan fiction that exists for it. And it's kind of happy. You're like, okay, this is what I want it to be like or what it could be like, you know?
Yeah. I wanted to ask too about smut
Yeah.
and why people are so drawn to it.
Yeah. I think, well, for me, I'm old. Well, I'm not old, but I'm just like, I'm an adult, like when I'm done, I'm tired. I want to read things that make me feel good. I want to escape. And I think what's really interesting about, you know, smut, at least in the communities or the genres that I read, is just so eloquently written. I think for me, a lot of things that I've learned reading fan fiction is I've met so many people who discovered their sexual identities through fan fiction. Like I didn't realize I was bi until I was reading content of two other men in these situations that I'm like, okay, I can take myself out of with these characterizations. I could see myself here. So it really was just an eye opener for like folks who are navigating their queerness or don't not necessarily know their
Mm.
queerness or understanding like what is sexuality? Am I ace? Am I asexual? Am I, like what is it that I want? So you can explore these worlds through the safe haven of fan fiction. And I think for me, first smut, I think when it comes down to like, oh, this is what you can like things in fiction you don't necessarily agree with or care for in real life. And it's just like, oh, okay. I hear people all the time like, yeah, I love to read I don't know, like monster fucking, or like I like it when they're women, but I myself don't see myself as a woman. So it's like hearing people's perspectives of why they're writing their stories. And usually authors leaves these types of notes. It's just interesting. It's like how people are processing their own emotions, what they like. Maybe it's purely for for fun, but it's usually a deeper connection. Like if people can write that type of content, like that could be published as novels. Like I can only imagine like what they what they can create outside of this world of fan fiction. So it runs,
Yeah.
at least for my community, it runs pretty deep. Like there's some pretty well-known authors in the community.
And maybe this is a naive question. I mean, a lot of
No.
my questions, I'm like, I have no idea. I'm
Yeah.
so curious. But I'm wondering, is there, like, can you do this full time? Like,
You
can you
know,
get paid to write fan fiction?
the thing is, it's a really big slippery slope. So there's like the department of like they're protected, but I wish I remember which rule, but the whole idea of fan fiction is it's derivative works. Like there's this whole like policy to protect folks to create, like art for art. It's meant to not be for profit, essentially, because
Mm,
there's copyright. So, like when you're starting to create things with copyright, it gets really, really messy. So, the archive of our own is a community-run platform. They built the platform. There's no app, and it's actually a pretty good website you can navigate on your phone, and it protects everyone's right to create derivative works, even from at the government level. But I would say, like, not necessarily, I don't know if it could be full time, but there are people who started as fans, like creating fan work, I've known who got picked up by the official publishers to create art for the books. And I think that's pretty amazing, just simply because, like, hey, I'm a fan artist. They're like, oh, we recognize your work. Will you create the licensed artwork for all of these books? And those are like artists I personally know. So I think that's pretty cool. For myself, I'm just like, people commission me to read their stories. So that's a nice side hustle. So I keep it on the down low. Like people kind of know, but like on Archive of Our Own, they explicitly say like no commodization, no mention of commoditization there, so they can protect the fact that like this is meant to be fan based and fan driven. But yeah, like my dream one day is to narrate like a full on real book or like quote real books. So yeah, but this is for fun. Like I think there's in a world we're always trying to hustle, right? Like what are hobbies we simply do for fun? And I just
so
do this
true.
for fun.
I just had a conversation with someone for the podcast where
Yeah.
we talked about side hustles and hustle culture and kind of breaking that down a little bit more because oftentimes
Yeah.
everyone wants to make money off of their hobbies, at least like me being based in New York. I know everyone that has some sort of side hustle where they get like some secondary source of income, and I love that for them. That's
Yeah.
amazing. But whatever happened to the hobbies that we just do for fun?
Exactly.
And we don't
Exactly.
have to, I think it goes back to almost like the capitalistic nature of just where we live and
Yeah.
how the culture is so ingrained in that mindset. But I love that you're just in this world, and I know that, well, hopefully people who are listening in are learning a ton because I know I am for sure. I did want to get back into something that you brought up about how when you were reading Smut, it was the idea that you were able to identify your own queerness or discover your own queerness through it. I'm also a queer person too, and the
Yeah.
fan fiction that I read, yes, was
Right.
queer. And I mean, in high school, I didn't really know. I was just figuring myself
Right.
out.
Right.
So reading that fan fiction, like I knew that I was drawn to it, but I didn't necessarily know why.
Mhm.
And now, after you said that, I was like, okay, this was just like one of the many signs that led me
Right.
to me realizing that I'm so queer.
Right.
But I wanted to ask you, what was your journey, like your journey of finding your queerness through smut and reading fan fiction like?
I think honestly, it was more of like a surprise and like, oh, okay. I think we're so conditioned. Well, maybe because I'm a millennial, I'm like, oh, we're so conditioned of like, this is what it is, right? Or I grew up like even talking to my friends now, it's like, is it weird that I don't know all these terms for or sexuality? They're like, no, because I'm still discovering it. I think fan fiction because exposes you to just kind of just different worlds, like different tropes. Like I'm not even gonna go down the rabbit hole. It makes you think like, hey, Oh, actually, I'm actually experiencing that. Like, oh, there's a term for that feeling or that type of, connection. So I think it just opened my world to like other people's perspectives because a lot of people do like to not necessarily throw themselves into the stories, but I think people generally write what they know. So being
Mm.
able to hear people talk about, and there's like notes like, oh, this came from like a personal experience, or like I just like this type of trope, or the fact like in media I don't see enough of this, therefore I'm going to create it in the story, thank you very much, enjoy it, is really just it's kind of eye opener, like what is missing, or like what are our predefined normative terms we think are normal versus like what are conversations we should have more of. So for me it was just very enlightening, and I was just like, oh my god, like am I a late bloomer if
You're
anything?
like, am I queer?
Yeah, exactly. But it wasn't scary at all. I think it was just like refreshing. Like all these things exist, in our worlds. And it's just like, hey, how come I've never really paid attention? Or maybe it's always in front of us and we just never really knew what to do with that information. I was like, okay, now I kind of know what to do. Or like how that information applies to me in a sense. So it was very liberating, I guess.
Yeah, no, totally. It's so fascinating that, the fan fiction and the things that you read like helped you in that journey. I also wanted to get into Danmei and talk a
Yeah.
little bit more about that. Why do you think people are so drawn to Danmei? Also, I've never heard of it until you brought it up today. So I'm curious, like, how niche this is or how big it actually is. I'm not aware of it.
I think it's become more popular since the start of the pandemic because what I was reading were, you know, they were already published on Chinese networks. So how do you get into Chinese networks first? They kind of have to know somebody, or like who has the translation. So people like secret teams are translating this content. So you'd kind of be like, hey, do you have the PDF of that story? So it's kind of like this underground thing. But once the Seven Seas, this publisher, kind of got their hands on it, like all that's gone. Like because now it's illegal to take it to have this content that they're now going to publish. So what really drew people, at least to me, is think of, I don't know, when I think of not content, when I think of media, I think there's a lot of cookie cutter like media when it comes to romance, and I think we're making strides in terms of queerness. But when you take Dan May, it's less about um these like typical tropes. Like you have war, you have politics, and you're understanding how these men are navigating war, politics, and romance all within it, on top of magic. Like, oh, okay, like there's some really, really intricate storylines, and I think it's just so captivating because it's nothing I've seen in traditional, at least English literature. So like I would say if you're into like magic, or if you're into like politics and war, and you like turned it up a notch like with this whole branch, like you won't believe the types of kind of like tropes and like spin-offs there exist. And it's just really captivating. Like, oh, and it all makes sense. You know what I mean? I'm like, I think it's just kind of like just a different type of literature that I think people are becoming more aware of. So I think that's awesome.
Uh, I also find too, no, this doesn't even just go for the literature that we're reading or that we're
Uh-huh.
listening to, but even within the like music world as well,
Yeah.
of more and more there are these like placeholders that used to be there for like particular genres, whether that's like TV shows and movies or
Right.
music or any other type of media that's out there. But as I guess with the like access to the internet and
Yeah.
more of this content being made, there is become less of this structure around genres and
Exactly.
more about like a blend between so many different things that
Hmm.
there are some of my favorite TV shows and movies, like they could fall under so many different genres.
Right.
And
Right.
it's this like genre bending type deal. I also think about Beyonce's Cowboy Carter album,
Yeah.
which to some could be considered a country album, but to her, it's a Beyonce album.
Right.
But it goes back to like this idea of all of these themes and genres and placeholders that are just overlapping with one another.
Yeah.
And I think we'll probably continue to get to a point where things just become like super niche. And I can see people being like very drawn to Danmei in like the future, and I'm sure that it's gonna keep growing as time goes on, or even maybe subsets of
Right.
Danmei based off of that too. So it's all so fascinating to
Yeah.
me. And I also wanted to ask you, as
Yeah.
you have been recording the audio fit or the podfics,
Yeah. Yeah.
why do you use an alias?
I think it's not that I'm definitely not embarrassed, and people like I sometimes even hinted on it in my professional profiles. I just don't want people like who are not in fan-based communities be like, "Oh my God, like, oh, you read porn." Well, yes, but it's more like artistic, you know. It's not like you have an OnlyFans. You're literally on the only website protected by law that allows you to create derivative works. Like I think people, if you're not aware of certain things, like people just be like, "Oh, this is." It could have probably implications, and I think there are parts of my life that I want to keep for myself, just like how I don't necessarily commoditize this, even though like people do pay me occasionally like, hey, will you do this? I was like, yeah, this will cost this much more for me to record your story. Like this is my hobby, and I think it's nice to be able to preserve elements of myself that not everyone has access to. Like you don't have access to me just because, this is here. Like if you're interested, great. But I don't necessarily think some people need to know. Like my boss knows I do something. He doesn't know the content. So he's like
Uh,
he's also an artist himself. He's just like, yeah, he's like, do whatever you want. He doesn't necessarily need to hear the details of what I do, if that makes sense.
totally. That's so funny. I think it is, I mean, I do not record podfics, but I'm sure that if I did, I would use some sort of alias because I think it also protects yourself in a way
Yeah.
too, where you want that separation between this work that you do and then
Mhm.
your own like personal life. And having that boundary, I think, is very smart and ideal to have.
Yeah.
Some more like quick rapid fire questions
Yeah.
are, what is your most listened to or downloaded podfic?
Um, I think it's becoming a tie now. So like when I first started, I think it was very meta. It was about a guy who has a crush on another guy who records he has a podcast where he just literally and it's called like Everyday. It's actually called Everyday Stories, and he just talks about random facts. So, but when he's not talking about random facts, he's like, I guess the other guy's taking a shower and he has music on the background and a podcast pops up and it's a naughty story. And he's like, where have I heard that voice before? And he realizes it's that same host. So now he's like, I gotta meet this person. So he realizes he's like, I know your secret. And they kind of like fall in love with or whatever. So I thought it was really representative of like, oh, I'm recording a podfic of somebody who's recording a secret podcast. So that was like downloaded like 13,000 times. And it's almost 2 hours long. So if people are like
Oh
literally
my gosh,
sitting there
two
listening,
hours?
yeah. So that's how big the story is. So let's say that's about maybe anywhere from let's say almost 30,000 words. So that took me about 2 hours to record. And I'm just reading. I'm literally just reading.
Do you do it in one take?
No, absolutely not. So I usually like I'll record throughout I like to record on the weekend and then edit throughout the week. Yeah.
So the podfics that you have recorded,
Yeah.
how are they usually 2 hours each?
It
Or does it
depends, and I
varies?
and I think it goes back to like the type of writers in my community, like like really talented writers. I think fan fiction gets a bad rep because it's like, oh, it's juvenile. And it's the fact like fan fiction's for everyone, but the fact that I'm like in a community where like 30s, 40s, 50s writing literary works, like think of actual novels. My longest one is 8 hours. Yeah,
8 hours?
that's really popular.
I cannot even imagine recording that in the
Yeah.
editing process. How long does that
Yes.
take you?
I think it took me about almost a year just because I just do it whenever I want. But like I would post like, hey, like maybe like anywhere from every 2 to 3 weeks to once a month, and people are just like, oh yeah, new chapter. Like and I was like, oh, it's finally done. So then they could listen to in full. But I usually post chapter per chapter, and then there's like one full audio later. People can listen to it.
Wow. There's
Yeah.
so much work that you're doing for this. I have so much respect. It's insane, but so, so cool. Oh my gosh. If people want to listen to your podfics, like where do we go?
y'all can just go to gempodfics.car.co and everything is like there. So you'll find like where to access it, like where to find me on social. So if you can survive navigating Archive of Our Own, it's not that difficult, but people are gonna be like, what the fuck? Like that's a different site. You'll be fine. I used to have it on Spotify, but I took it down just because in the spirit of fandom, I was like, let me just keep it in in the fandom community. But if you type Danmei Podfics with Gem on Spotify, it will pop up and it will tell you like, hey, in the show notes, you can access the full story here.
I love that. And my last question for you is
Mhm.
maybe it's kind of like off topic, but I've
Yeah,
been
yeah.
asking everyone this question as of recent. And I like to close with, what have you learned over the past year that you're
Mhm.
going to take into your new year of life?
What have I learned the past year? I mean, I've always been unapologetic. I think I'm just going to be a little more, even more unapologetic. If I want something, I'm going to get it. Like, I'm going to go for it. No questions asked. I think life is too short to question whether you should or shouldn't be doing something. I mean, I didn't think the story was actually called Headphones and Naughty Whispers would be a hit, but here we are 4 years later, people listening to me moan in their ears as acting as men or like gay women. So go for
Oh
it.
my gosh. Well, Jem, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I love this conversation. I'm gonna listen to a podfic of two of yours. I'm very excited. I hope everyone else can as well. I do like to close every episode with a quote, and it's based off of my love for Criminal Minds, where
Yeah.
if whoever has like watch Criminal Minds, they always start and end every single episode with quotes. And so I, no joke, was terrible and didn't even put a quote in your document, but I just found one that I'm going to read off.
Okay.
And it is: fan fiction is the mad woman in mainstream culture's attic, but the attic won't contain it forever. Writing and reading fan fiction isn't just something you do. It's a way of thinking critically about the media you consume, of being aware of all the implicit assumptions that a canonical work carries with it, and of considering the possibility that those assumptions might not be the only way things have to be. And that is from Anne Jameson. Um, and that's the quote that I'll leave everyone with.
Okay. I love that. And that's so funny. I think that is a perfect description of just fan fiction general. Things aren't necessarily what it has to be. And in this world or this community, you can make it anything you want.
I love it. Well, thank you again,
Yeah.
Jem, for hopping on the podcast. And thank you, everyone else, for tuning in.
Thanks for having me. Bye, Alex.